even recommend Psycho for this. I'm really concerned now that there's been 2 times that I've not been able to remember or find it again. I literally just went through this with Night of the Creeps. Oh my god. Hey there, creepy peeps. I'm Nightmare Maven. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I might have a problem with my memory, but I do post spooky content all year long, always horror all the time. So if you end up liking this video, maybe subscribe. This is a horror education video. I do remember that. Horror education is a series where I explore movies, books, and topics in horror through the lens of being a queer person. It's mostly for my own education, and I thought some of y'all might like it as well, so here we are. I like to keep mentioning that I do this series for my own education because so many of the movies I've covered, whether it's been you guys suggesting it or me just kind of finding them on my own, are older classic horror movies that I never even realized fans saw as queer coded. And all it takes is for me to just search the movie with LGBTQ at the end, and I end up getting a million articles and essays about that topic, and it's just wild to me, and I love it so much. And that's what I did with Psycho, and like every other time it came up with a million essays and articles about queer coding, not only just in Psycho, but in Hitchcock films in general, which I thought was pretty fucking rad. I just basically love like film history and analysis so much. It's so fun. I'm so glad I have a degree in film studies. That's all I wanted to say in this intro. Okay, before we get into the queer coding of Norman Bates and Psycho, I feel like it's necessary to maybe like set a definition for 2 terms. So we do talk about queer coding a lot in these horror education videos. Queer coding is defined as the subtextual coding of a character in media as queer. Though such a character's sexual identity may not explicitly be confirmed within their respective work, or they may in fact be straight despite their queer mannerisms, a character might be coded as queer through the use of traits and stereotypes recognizable to the audience. It's pretty widely accepted that queer coding stemmed from really restrictive regulations such as the Hays Code. And when Psycho was made, the Hays Code was still in effect. So the Hays Code, also known as the Motion Picture Production Code, was a set of industry guidelines for the self-censorship of content that was applied to most motion pictures released by major studios in the US from 1934 to 1968. And as you can probably guess, overt depictions of homosexuality was a no-no. I definitely recommend looking up the Hays Code and like all of the guidelines for things you could and couldn't portray. It's wild. But during this time, filmmakers would get away with things like queer coding characters by making those characters morally reprehensible and therefore punished at the end of the film. So in the case of Psycho, we have Norman Bates, who yes is queer coded, but is also a serial killer. I know, it's not the best representation. Okay, so now that we have those definitions out of the way, let's talk about Norman Bates. Norman is portrayed as this kind of effeminate character and a mama's boy to boot. Both things were definitely huge hints to queer coding during the Hays Code. And apparently Hitchcock chose Anthony Perkins because he was more effeminate and soft-spoken. I don't know if that's like genuinely true or not. If it is, that's at least interesting. Mrs. Bates was clearly an abusive presence in Norman's life. We know that for sure. And a lot of the trauma Norman holds onto in the movie is based on his behavior and how his mother would have treated him. So I can totally see how fans would see Norman Bates and read him as being repressed. And that would totally explain Norman peeping on Marion when she's getting ready for her shower. You could read it as him knowing he's supposed to be attracted to her, but isn't, or the very real possibility that Norman could be bi. Peeping could also be seen as Norman coveting femininity. There were a few essays I read that suggested Norman was jealous of Marion, suggesting there may be some trans coding in the film. I would love to hear what y'all think of that in the comments. I at least feel, and this is coming from a cis woman, so huge grain of salt, that it's pretty clear that Norman is dressing as his mother as a direct result of the trauma that she caused. And I feel like suggesting that maybe Norman Bates is a transgender character could be super duper harmful. And I feel like that's not an accurate depiction of what it means to be transgender. I just feel like that's like demonstrably false. One thing that is certain, Norman is absolutely a repressed character, no matter what way you want to interpret the movie. Having lived his life entirely at the motel, taking care of his mother, many queer fans surely can find something to relate to in that. And we see Norman and his desire to be free and spread his wings like the taxidermied birds on his parlor wall. And then we have these two instances in the movie. They're pieces of dialogue, but they're a lot more overt than the rest of the movie. The first is when Norman is taking his mother down to the fruit cellar and she says, and I quote, "No, I will not hide in the fruit cellar. You think I'm fruity, huh?" My delivery was not great. That's not really how she says it, but I never claimed to be an actor, so. The second instance is at the end of the movie when the authorities are discussing Norman and they call him a transvestite, which obviously now is regarded as a super outdated and derogatory term. But one of the men made a comment to the effect of like, "Oh, is that why he was crazy?" And then the psychiatrist guy, to his credit, dismisses that idea and more correctly diagnoses Norman's desire to dress up like his mother as a result of the trauma that he went through. And finally, definitely a main reason why so many fans have gone back and viewed Psycho as queer-coded is the fact that Anthony Perkins, who plays Norman Bates, was queer. Amongst everything I read, I couldn't find anything anywhere that confirmed whether Perkins had ever come out publicly. He was known to have had same-sex relationships before he eventually married his wife, Berinthia Berenson. I really hope I said her first name right. Overall, I love Psycho. It's one of my favorite horror movies. My mom also liked it, which is how I saw it for the first time because of her. And I'm thrilled to have this analysis to add to my love of this movie. And if one of you did suggest this and I forgot, I'm so incredibly sorry. Please let me know in the comments so I can shout you out at least in some way. And of course, let me know what you think of this interpretation of Psycho, or if there's anything I missed that you think adds to this analysis. And as always, if you think of any movies or books that you would like to see covered in a future horror education video, you can let me know in the comments. I can't guarantee that I will remember that it was you that suggested it, but I will try harder to not forget anymore. If you ended up liking this video, give it a thumbs up. It really does help me out. And you can subscribe, become a creepy peep today, and I will see you Friday with a new video. Until then, stay strange. Bye.